Let me ask you something. Think about the smartest person you know. Maybe it's a colleague who can solve problems in seconds. Maybe it's a friend who got a perfect score on every exam they ever took. Maybe, if we're being honest, you think that person might be you. Now, can you think of a time that person, maybe that exact same person, made a decision so boneheaded, so completely backwards, that you stood there staring at them thinking, how? How does someone that smart do something that dumb? Maybe it was a business decision, an investment they were convinced was bulletproof, a relationship they stayed in way too long, even though everyone around them could see what was happening, a health choice they justified with what sounded like really convincing logic, right up until everything fell apart. Here's the thing. Most people don't want to hear. Intelligence does not protect you from bad decisions. In fact, and this is the part that's going to bother you, in a lot of situations, being smarter actually makes you more likely to walk straight into a trap. I know, that sounds backwards. It is backwards. That's exactly why we need to talk about it. Before we get into the how and why of all this, let me hit you with a few numbers that genuinely stopped me when I first read them. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by researchers Keith Stanovich and Richard West found that people with higher cognitive ability, higher IQ, higher SAT scores, were actually more susceptible to what's called the bias blind spot. That's the tendency to believe you are less biased than other people. The smarter the person, the more convinced they were that their reasoning was objective. The more convinced they were, the less they bothered checking it. Let that sit for a second. The smarter you are, the more certain you feel that you're thinking clearly. And that certainty, that's the trap. Here's another one. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how humans make decisions. His research, which became the best-selling book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, concluded that intelligence and rational decision-making are two almost completely separate skills. You can be exceptional at one and absolutely terrible at the other. Kahneman, himself, one of the most decorated thinkers of the 20th century, said he was not immune to the very biases he spent his life studying. If a Nobel Prize winner can't escape this, what chance do the rest of us have if we don't even know what we're looking for? And then there's this. A study from Yale University found that people with stronger math and analytical skills were actually more likely to be swayed by politically charged data, not less. When the data matched what they already believed, they used their analytical skills to confirm it. When it contradicted their beliefs, they used those same skills to poke holes in it. They weren't thinking more clearly. They were rationalizing more effectively. That's the intelligence trap, and most people have no idea it exists. Okay, so let's get into this properly. Because to understand why smart people make terrible decisions, you first have to understand something about how the brain actually works. Think of your brain as having two systems running at the same time. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2, but let's make this simpler. System 1 is your autopilot. It's fast, it's automatic, it runs on gut feelings and patterns. It's the part of your brain that knows 2 plus 2 is 4, without having to work for it. It's the part that makes you duck when something flies at your head before you've even consciously registered that it happened. Autopilot is incredible. It keeps you alive. System 2 is your analyst. It's slow, it's deliberate, it takes actual mental effort. It's the part of you that, when faced with a complex math problem, has to sit down and work through it step by step. It's the part that second guesses, that plans, that weighs options. Here's where it gets interesting. Most people assume that smarter people use System 2 more analysis, more logic, better outcomes. And in some contexts, that's true. But here's what the research actually shows. People with high intelligence are extraordinarily good at running System 1 stories, gut-level intuitions, and then using System 2 to justify them. They're not necessarily reasoning better. They're rationalizing faster and more convincingly to themselves and to everyone around them. Imagine you're building a court case. The average person builds a weak case, sloppy arguments, obvious holes, easy to poke apart. The intelligent person builds a fortress, airtight arguments, sophisticated language, layers of logic that all support the conclusion they already emotionally arrived at before they started. The problem is, the conclusion was wrong from the start. And now, it's wrapped in so much intellectual scaffolding that it's almost impossible for anyone, including them, to see that. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most dangerous cognitive traps a human being can fall into. Because it doesn't feel like a trap, it feels like thinking. Now, you've probably heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's famous. It gets thrown around constantly. The idea is that people with low ability in something tend to massively overestimate their competence. They don't know enough to know how much they don't know. But here's what almost nobody talks about. The effect has a flip side, and this flip side is what catches intelligent people. As people become genuinely more competent, more knowledgeable, more experienced, their confidence in their field grows too. That part makes sense. But then something strange happens. They start applying that same confidence to adjacent areas where they have no real expertise at all. It's the halo effect turned inward. A brilliant surgeon assumes their analytical skills make them a good stock picker. A genius-level software engineer assumes their systems thinking makes them qualified to redesign education policy. A highly successful entrepreneur assumes that, because they've cracked their industry, they understand politics, relationships, nutrition, and child psychology. I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying smart. Successful people can't learn about other fields. Obviously they can. The problem is, when they skip the learning phase and go straight to the conclusions phase, because that's what their brain has trained them to do in their own domain, in their own field. They've earned the right to trust their gut, their pattern. Recognition is real, but their brain doesn't differentiate. It just says, you're good at thinking, so your thinking is good. There's a phrase I keep coming back to when I think about this. It's from the philosopher Bertrand Russell. The fundamental cause of trouble in the world is that the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt. He said that almost a century ago. The research since then has only complicated it. Because the reality is, both groups struggle. The difference is in how they fail. The less informed person fails loudly, visibly, in ways that are easy to diagnose. The intelligent person fails quietly, convincingly, in ways that can take years to unravel. And by then, the damage is done. Let me tell you about a pattern that plays out over and over again in financial markets. And I want to be clear, this isn't about any one person. It's a composite of a very common story. Someone builds a successful career. They're analytical, disciplined, and they've spent years mastering a complex skill set. They start making real money. They decide it's time to invest. And because they're smart, they don't just throw money into an index fund and walk away like a passive observer. No, they research deeply. They read everything. They build models, They develop a thesis, a sophisticated, well-reasoned, internally consistent argument for why a particular investment is going to perform. They're so confident in their analysis that they go big, maybe bigger than they should. Because look, they've done the work. They've thought it through. This isn't gambling. This is precision. And then the market does something their model didn't account for. Something unpredictable. Something that a simpler, less certain investor would have been protected against simply because they were more diversified, more humble about what they didn't know. The simple investor shrugs and moves on. They didn't lose much. The sophisticated investor loses significantly. And then, here's the kicker, they double down. Because the data still supports their thesis, right? The market is wrong. The market will correct. They just need to be patient. That's not analysis anymore. That's ego, wrapped in the language of analysis. This pattern is so consistent that researchers have a name for it, overclaiming. A 2015 study published in Psychological Science found that people who scored higher on tests of general knowledge were significantly more likely to claim expertise in areas that don't exist, things researchers literally made up. They claimed familiarity with fake scientific concepts, fake historical events, fake people, not because they were lying, because their brain filled in the gaps automatically, and their confidence told them to trust it. The more you know, the more your brain assumes it knows. That's not a bug. That's just how pattern recognition works. But in a world where overconfidence can cost you your savings, your relationships, your health, it's a feature that can absolutely destroy you. Okay, here's the part that I think is the most underrated piece of this whole thing. And it's something that almost nobody talks about when they talk about intelligence and decision making. High IQ does not equal high emotional intelligence. In fact, there's a compelling body of research suggesting that extreme analytical intelligence can sometimes come at the cost of emotional awareness. Think about it this way. The brain is a resource management system. It allocates mental energy to whatever it decides is most important. And if you've spent years, decades, training yourself to be an elite analytical thinker, your brain has built extraordinary infrastructure in certain areas, systems for logical reasoning, for abstract thought, for complex problem solving. But that infrastructure took something. It didn't come for free. Now, I want to be nuanced here because this is not a rule. There are people with exceptional analytical intelligence who are also deeply emotionally aware. It's possible. But the research suggests it's less common than people assume. And more importantly, even the people who have emotional intelligence often fail to apply it when they most need it. Here's why. When we're under stress, when stakes are high, when ego is involved, that's precisely when System 1 takes over. The gut feeling, the emotional reaction, the fast intuition. And for intelligent people, the fast intuition often comes dressed up in rational clothing. It doesn't arrive as, I'm scared, or I'm insecure, or I'm threatened. It arrives as a sophisticated logical argument for why the thing that makes them feel safe or validated is actually the smart choice. A classic example is the intelligent person in a deteriorating relationship. They don't say, I'm scared of being alone. They build a 12-point case for why, on balance, the relationship still makes sense. They run the pros and cons. They contextualize the problems. They tell themselves, and everyone who will listen, that this is a rational assessment. It isn't. It's fear with a PowerPoint presentation. And this is one of the most painful things about the intelligence trap, because the tools that make you successful in so many areas of life, the analytical rigor, the ability to construct arguments, the capacity for complex reasoning, those same tools become weapons your brain uses against you when the emotional stakes are high. Let's talk about confirmation bias. You know what it is? The tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what you already believe. Here's the thing: confirmation bias affects everyone. It is one of the most thoroughly documented cognitive biases in all of psychology. Every human being does it. IQ doesn't make you immune. But, and this is critical, intelligence changes how you do it. And how you do it determines how bad the damage is. The person with average analytical skills might hold a wrong belief. When confronted with contradictory evidence, their defense is emotion, frustration, dismissiveness. I just know, okay? It's not pretty, but it's also not very sophisticated. Other people can see it clearly. They can often be talked out of it. Given enough time and patience, the person with exceptional analytical skills holds a wrong belief. When confronted with contradictory evidence, they engage with it. They find the methodological flaws in the study. They point to alternative interpretations. They construct counter-arguments that are genuinely impressive. They make the person who disagrees with them feel like the confused one. This is what psychologists call sophisticated rationalization, and it is terrifying in practice, because from the outside and from the inside, it looks exactly like careful, rigorous thinking, only it's not. The conclusion was fixed before the argument began. The intelligence is just serving the ego. And here's the devastating part: the more intelligent you are, the harder you are to convince when you're wrong, because you have more resources at your disposal for building the fortress of self-justification. You have bigger walls, more guards, every exit sealed. A 2017 meta-analysis published in Perspectives on Psychological Science confirmed that higher cognitive ability was associated with greater susceptibility to belief perseverance, the tendency to maintain a belief even when confronted with overwhelming contradictory evidence. You read that right. Smarter people hold on to wrong beliefs longer and more stubbornly because they're better at defending them. Look, we need to add one more layer here, because decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in social contexts, and intelligence affects how you navigate those contexts in ways that can quietly make everything worse. Smart people are often surrounded by people who are either intimidated by them or deferential to them. This is a problem, not because of anything the smart person did wrong necessarily. It's just the social physics of operating with perceived high status in a group. When you're the smartest person in the room, or when people believe you are, which matters just as much, the normal social mechanisms that provide error correction start to break down. People stop pushing back. They start looking for signs that you're right, rather than critically evaluating whether you are. They fill in your silences with competence. They interpret your confidence as certainty. This is called authority bias, and it is one of the most powerful forces in human social dynamics. Research by Robert Cialdini and others has demonstrated consistently that people defer to perceived experts even when those experts are demonstrably wrong. The authority figure says something confident and plausible sounding, and most people in the room mentally file it as probably correct. Now combine this with everything we've already talked about. You have an intelligent person who has developed sophisticated rationalization skills, who is prone to overconfidence in adjacent domains, who has ego invested in being right, and now they're operating in a social environment where almost nobody is going to challenge them seriously. The feedback loop that might catch a less intelligent person's errors simply doesn't exist anymore. This is one of the reasons why some of the most catastrophic organizational decisions in history were made by groups of highly intelligent people. The phenomenon even has a name: groupthink, and the higher the average intelligence of the group, the more dangerous it can become, because everyone in the room is better at rationalizing the consensus and dismissing dissent. The smartest rooms can be the most dangerous rooms. All right, so we've spent some time identifying the problem, and I want to be fair here. This whole video could feel pretty bleak if I leave it there. Like, what's the point of being smart if it makes you worse at the thing that matters most? But here's the thing. Knowing about these traps is genuinely useful. Not because knowledge automatically changes behavior. We've just spent 15 minutes establishing that it doesn't necessarily, but because awareness, combined with specific practices, actually does change outcomes. The research supports that too. So let me give you the framework that actually works. First, develop what's called epistemic humility as a practice, not just a value. This sounds obvious. It isn't. Most people who value humility treat it as a personality trait. I'm a humble person. That's basically meaningless. Real epistemic humility is a system. It means actively building the habit of asking, before you defend a position, what would it take to change my mind on this? If you can't answer that clearly, if there's no possible evidence that would update your belief, you don't have a rational position. You have a faith-based one. And there's nothing wrong with faith in the right context, but don't confuse it with analysis. Second, seek out people who will tell you you're wrong. This is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. High-performing individuals across domains, good CEOs, good athletes, good scientists, consistently report that one of their most valuable assets is someone in their life whose job is basically to poke holes in everything they believe. Not to be contrary, to find the weakness before it finds you. If everyone in your life is agreeing with you, that's a red flag, not a sign of correctness. Third, use pre-mortems, not post-mortems. A post-mortem is what you do after something goes wrong. You analyze what happened. This is useful, but it's also too late. A pre-mortem is what psychologist Gary Klein developed as an alternative. Before you make a big decision, you assume the decision failed. Completely. Catastrophically. And then you ask, why? What went wrong? What did we miss? This technique is almost supernaturally effective at bypassing motivated reasoning because it reframes the analytical task. Instead of using your intelligence to defend a decision you want to make, you're using it to break a decision you're pretending you already made. Your brain engages differently. The fortress comes down. Fourth, track your predictions. This one is simple, and most people never do it. Write down your confident predictions. Attach a confidence percentage. Then check them. Actually go back and score yourself. This practice, called calibration training, has been shown to meaningfully improve decision-making quality over time in a way that most other interventions don't, because you can't lie to yourself about your track record if you've written it down. The data is right there. Philip Tetlock's research on super forecasters, the people who are genuinely better than average at predicting complex events, found that this habit of checking yourself over time was one of the most consistent traits they shared. Not raw intelligence, not advanced degrees, just honest accounting of when they were right and when they were wrong. Fifth, and this might be the most important one, Separate your identity from your ideas. This is the root of so much of it. When your sense of who you are is tied to being the smart one, being right, having good judgment, then being wrong isn't just an intellectual correction. It's an attack on your identity, and your brain is going to fight an identity attack with everything it has. The people who escape the intelligence trap most consistently are the ones who have built their identity around something more flexible: curiosity, learning, growth, not around being correct, but around getting to correct. That shift sounds subtle. The psychological effect is enormous, because now being wrong is just information, not a threat, just a signal to update. That's it. That's the whole unlock. And I know it sounds simple, and I know a part of you is already constructing a very sophisticated argument for why your situation is different. That's the trap doing its thing. Notice it, then ignore it. Let me leave you with something. The smartest decision I've ever seen people make isn't a business decision. It isn't an investment. It's the decision to take their own thinking seriously, which paradoxically means treating it with much more skepticism. The intelligence trap is not a flaw in smart people. It's a feature of the human brain that gets amplified by cognitive ability. Every single person watching this is susceptible to it in some domain of their life. Maybe you already know which one. If you're sitting there feeling a little uncomfortable right now, good. That discomfort is useful. It's the beginning of the loop that catches the trap before it catches you. The most dangerous thought a smart person can have isn't a wrong idea. It's the conviction that they'd never miss one. Stay curious. Stay skeptical, especially about yourself. And if this hit differently than you expected, drop a comment. Tell me the domain where you've caught your own intelligent brain leading you somewhere dumb. I'll read every single one. See you in the next one.